LibertyNation.com does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. The Hunter Biden criminal charges, Donald Trump's interview, and Tucker, Joe Rogan, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. on vaccines and what they're afraid of. All right now on this episode of The Uprising by LibertyNation.com.
We are The Uprising.
Okay.
Hello, Moto.
Perfectly timed phone call to demonstrate what happens when you don't mute your devices, Tim. Let that be a lesson to you. That's the best thing to do when you get caught with your pants down. You turn it right around and
Let
say,
that be a lesson
listen,
to you.
don't let this happen to you, okay?
Yeah. No, I prefer let this be a lesson.
Let's just be that, right?
I
exactly.
like that one because that borders on being accusatory.
Right.
Without it actually being accusatory.
That's a perfect position for a podcast that covers politics. Welcome back to The Uprising, Mr. Timothy Elting Donner.
I'm your host me again.
I'm your host, Scott D. Cosenza, LibertyNation.com's legal affairs editor. And Tim, you are the political analyst. You are the senior political analyst. Excuse me. I always want to give you credit for
it's okay.
Your senior status.
At my age, I don't exactly resent losing the senior part of.
Well, we're perfectly suited for discussing the news of the week, Tim, because it is both political and legal in nature, as it often is in this town. But boy, extra servings all around this week with the Hunter Biden.
Beverly Hillbillies used to call a heaping helping.
Yes, exactly. And these are the well, I won't say that they're the Washington Hillbillies.
Well, Delaware is that.
Well, let's launch right into it.
Thing?
We're going to talk about Trump's interview with Bret Baier, whether it was a disaster or something else. That should give you a preview of my my thoughts on it, and a little bit about Mr. Durham and Tucker and JFK Jr. on Rogan. But before we get into all that, the big, is it the big story of the week? Yes, it probably is the big story of the week, is that Hunter Biden, the first son, is now going to plead guilty to a couple of misdemeanor tax crimes and get a diversion by pleading guilty to lying about a question on a gun form and walk away from liability from those crimes. This was so let's just sort of track this, and let's just state at the outset, this has nothing to do with the Hunter Biden laptop story or any data that may have been discovered on the laptop or anything like that. With the exception that maybe Hunter Biden's multiple videos of him using crack could get into play. Let's talk about the gun charge firstly. Oh, I was going to say how we got started with all this, which was that an IRS a criminal sort of agent is the one who kind of dug all this up and sort of brought it to people. It wasn't like some Republican senator, decided to issue charges or something like that. It came about kind of organically within the IRS. That's what we're led to believe. But let's talk about the gun charge, and we'll talk about the tax charges. And let me say at the outset, Tim, my position on all this is I wish they wouldn't prosecute any American for any of these crimes because they are victimless crimes. Mm-hmm. And I believe that perhaps they're unconstitutional in the first place. And then with that said, if they are going to prosecute crimes like these, they shouldn't prosecute you who aren't the president's son and then not prosecute the president's son. And I think that's probably what we have here. So I'll open up the floor for your comment.
Well, I think that it's the ideal way to sort of keep this process moving towards getting it shoved to the side by the Biden family and the Democratic operation in Washington. You plead guilt. The son of the president pleads guilty to a couple things that are ultimately inconsequential to any larger context. And you could say, well, justice has been served and you move on. and that conveniently shoves to the side the real crimes that Hunter Biden is accused of. So now
which is aiding his father in a bribery, pay for play, influence peddling scheme to the tune of at least $5 million and perhaps quite a bit more than that. Yeah. If you're in for a dime, right?
Credible
you're in for more than 5 million, you know.
A credible estimate would be several times that amount when you add up the stuff in Romania, the stuff in China, the stuff in Ukraine. Shaking down Burisma is what he's accused of. After being on the board and making, what was it, $800 and some a month, or was it $400 and some thousand a month for doing essentially nothing? I mean, it's all just stinks to high hell. And the only question is whether the elite media is going to go all the way to the barricades to stop this from metastasizing to the point where, you know, their guy might not get reelected, might have to step down, which is maybe what they want, because I think elite media really wants Gavin Newsom. But of course, there's a little issue of the vice president, too. So,
well,
you know, the whole thing is, I just think it's a smokescreen. To summarize, it's a smokescreen for much more significant violations of the law. And now, of course,
hold on, just stop there for a second, if you would, because I think that's a very important point. That seems to me to be what has happened as well. And here's why this would be for people who haven't, you know, delved into the nitty gritty on the charges. The reason why the Biden family might accept this as you know, a court of play in that regard is because these charges don't touch the father. They're all about Hunter Biden's wrongdoing with, you know, relatively minor. One is totally attributable to substance abuse, and I'm sure that they think they can explain that away as a medical, you know, societal
he
problem.
Was an addict, and Joe Biden says he's proud of how his son had struggles with addiction and overcome it. Yeah.
It's a great way to get out of it, you know. And so, by the way, let's just talk about that charge for a second. So for people who don't know, when you buy a gun from a federally licensed firearms dealer, it's called a 4473, I think, is the name of the form. In older days, it was called a yellow form, but you have to fill out a form that is, you know, basically your name, your address, your serial number. Have you been convicted of a felony? Have you been adjudicated mentally incompetent? You have to answer these questions under penalty of perjury and then sign that form. Are you now, or are you a habitual user or addicted to narcotics? I think is, I hope somebody checks that, because that's from memory. I think I got that right. I filled out a number of these forms in the past, Tim. I won't say why, but in any case, I
think you should be subject to several queries that begin with "Are you now?" or "Have you ever been?"
Right. A member of the whatever party.
You're the subject. You should be the subject of so many of those.
Now these questions. So Hunter Biden lied when he said he wasn't an active user and addicted to narcotics, because he was an active user and addicted to narcotics at the time he filled out the form. And that's what he's pled guilty to that. And he's going to get a diversion program, they say. So how we know about this, there's so many details to discuss. How we know about this story, by the way, this is one of the things that drove me crazy, Tim. It's not like Merrick Garland or Mr. Weiss, who's the U.S. attorney for Delaware, held a press conference and said, you know, this is what we've come to decide about these charges concerning the son of our boss, the president of the United States of America, who, by the way, already said publicly multiple times his son did nothing wrong. That's
well, he also said, okay? Said this is important multiple times, that he had never spoken with Hunter about his business dealings.
I
mean, at this point, that's a joke.
Well, let's just put the president's culpability aside for a moment and just talk about the son. And he's already said that he did nothing wrong. And then the U.S. attorney, whose boss is the president, and the attorney general, of course, whose boss is the president, don't say anything about these charges. What they did was they filed a letter in federal court asking for the date on to docket some time, because the judge basically has to hear this and then agree to the plea entry for it to become official. And so that's how we know about it. And we know from leaks to major media outlets that they're going to ask for no prison time on these things. So the office is leaking to the media. And it's not like, this is some like weeks out thing. Like those leaks were dialed in, ready to go. So there's a problem there with the nature of this, this level of justice. But what I wanted to say, the whole point of this lead up is to say, Tim, I think that we shouldn't have this form. This idea that if we have the right to keep and bear arms, I have to certify in advance before I try to exercise this right. I'm okay with respect to this issue of drugs. What other certifications can they make? I think it's really runs counter to the Second Amendment. If the state wants to forbid me from purchasing a firearm for any reason, I think it's incumbent upon the state to make a case in court to deprive me of my rights to bear arms. And if they meet that burden, which should be very high, then they can proceed and strip me of my rights. That seems to me to be fair and how we should deal in society with the problem of people who shouldn't have guns not having guns. Otherwise, this sort of pre-approval, how does that jibe with our notion of limited government?
Well, you can't help but think that the gun charge was something that, they could come through with that and be applauded by the left, because it dealt with gun regulations, and nobody who would ordinarily support Joe Biden by default is going to be upset about a gun charge or a tax charge, because it's so easy to say, well, look at Trump, and he's been evading taxes for years, and it just gets lost in the sauce. Again, it's all, what it is, it's all a smokescreen for the serious, let's put it this way. I don't think it's a stretch to say that if this was Donald Trump Jr. or Eric Trump instead of Hunter Biden, and the attachments to the big guy, if it was Donald Trump, he'd already been run out of Washington on a rail, impeached and probably convicted. But with Biden, literally, if you look hard into all the things of which he's been credibly accused with evidence, it's hard to believe that none of this has yet to really touch him in a way that's commensurate with a degree of misbehavior.
I think that you're both right about that, and that is a perfect demonstration of the power of the establishment, because the establishment wants him in power. And so
Yes.
all things will be forgiven until the day they have a better or different choice. And
The
then
only thing that they won't forgive is if Biden manages to lose the election. That's the only thing they won't forgive.
Well,
And then
if they are the power, if they're the power that we think they are, that they won't leave up to chance that he will be able to lose to someone who doesn't support their interests. So I would suggest that the establishment will be running both sides will likely have to bow down.
I'd like to know the degree of right of center, let's say freedom-minded, conservative, libertarian people believe in advance that the outcome in 2024 is going to be credible.
Yeah.
What percent? What do you think? 25%? 2/3 of the party believes against all the coverage by
I think that
mainstream media that
I wouldn't
Trump
restrict
was-
that. I wouldn't restrict that analysis to conservatives, Tim. All Americans seem to have a lack of faith in our.
Well, I will say that's true, but people don't worry about it much if their side wins,
yeah,
right? In other
well,
words,
they could lose though, and then they will be.
but I
worried
mean,
about
think about we'll go from a 500-foot view to a 50,000-foot view. Think about what that means for the future of the country if a majority of people, or even a significant minority,
Oh yeah,
significant outraged minority, know longer believe that the outcomes of elections are to be trusted. I mean, if you can't have fair elections, or you can't have elections that people trust at a very high level, then you really are losing
We're going to play
what we are.
We're going to play a clip on that in just a second. But before we do, I just want to say Donald Trump's children and his relationship with his children were vilified because they were like White House advisors. And and also I'm including Mr. Kushner in this regard. And I remember seeing so much written about them in the negative, like what are their interests and who are they representing? But of course, the reason why it would make sense for Mr. Trump to hire his children is because he can trust them and he can know that they are presumably that their interest is in their father having a successful presidency.
Right.
And executing his will and mission in that regard. And so he's a pro nepotism for all the best parts of nepotism, not because, my drooling nephew can't get a job anywhere else, so I'll let him go, work in the mailroom kind of nepotism. The opposite of I need somebody I can trust implicitly, who I don't have to worry about all the many motives they have. And we see, to the extent that Trump's administration was a failure, I think we can say it was because of the competing desires of those who he thought were going to work to implement his vision instead were working for themselves.
Well, you have to have people that you trust.
Well, wait, let me just add this, Tim. And the juxtaposition is that that Joe Biden's kid was hired to do something he'd never done for somebody, and it seems like the only motivation was to put money in Biden's pocket for his father's influence. So if I hire Joe Biden's kid to be an undersea submarine rescuer, and we know that all he's ever done is look at a picture of a submarine, like why would we put the money out there for that? Why would he be hired as a petrochemical expert in the Ukraine when he's nothing of the kind? It doesn't make any sense except for bribery. I just want to say, Tim,
we pretty much have evidence of that in the 16 separate bank accounts that were formed for the sole purpose of accepting payments for, I believe it's 9 separate members of the Biden family. I mean, it's a way of evading detection. I mean, 16 separate accounts with no transactions, no services, nothing except the acceptance of millions of dollars of foreign cash.
That sounds totally crooked to me, but I can't say for sure that it's crooked. But I know for sure.
Well, it may be totally illegal.
But I know. But here's the thing, Tim. That's why I want to focus on the payment of him in this role, because there's no defense for that. Like there can be no defense of, oh, you know what? Secretly, Joe Biden had a chemical engineering degree from MIT or Texas A&M. Like, no, that didn't happen. He's not a petrochemical engineer. He has no idea about this stuff. So why is he on the board? And why is he making a boatload of cash? There's only one reason that it seems to me to make sense why, and that is because it's a crooked enterprise. Now, another crooked enterprise is the vaccine failure to debate situation. Are you all up on the latest on this?
Pretty much. I know that it's garnering a lot more publicity for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., which is what he needs in his battle to even gain any recognition in his fight against Joe Biden.
Tucker talked about this on his latest episode, and I wrote about it for the pages of LibertyNation.com, Tim, the people's source for conservatarian news and analysis, 24/7, 365. And Joe Rogan had Kennedy on for a long-form interview, and he discussed the vaccine and how nobody would debate him. And this doctor called Peter Hotez, who's this fantastically credentialed head of Baylor Medicine's vaccine stuff, and also an apologist for the vaccine on MSNBC. He's like an MSNBC regular. And Kennedy criticized him by name and said he wouldn't debate him. And after this show airs, Hotez tweets out this linked to this Vice story that said that Joe Biden was like neo-fascist adjacent or something. Like, it was just like, how do you call somebody a Nazi without calling them a Nazi? You know, like that was basically the gist of it.
Neo-fascist adjacent.
Right. Yeah.
That's great.
And
that's really
yeah.
good.
And so Rogan sends a message to them and tweets into his 11 million strong Twitter followers and says, why don't you debate? I'll pay you $100K to a charity of your choice just to debate Kennedy on this. And then since that time, I think it's well over $2 million is the kitty now, with all these people like jumping on the bandwagon, throwing their check in the ring. And Hotez again and again and again refuses, and not only refuses to debate, but holds up the refusal like that refusal should be lauded as a virtue.
Right.
Because yeah, right. So
Right,
anyway,
because
Tucker talked about it.
RFK Jr. is a conspiracy theorist, and the vaccine stuff. You know, it's an interesting political dynamic here, because when you talk about vaxxers and anti-vaxxers, people who bow down to the vaccine, and people that think that it's actually designed to kill people, and everything in between those two bookend views.
Right.
In the whole thing, it's easy to forget that the guy that came up with the vaccines was Donald Trump. And now he's sort of having to defend that against DeSantis. And on the other side, Biden is sort of the same as Trump, pro-vaccine, and RFK Jr., has he has a long trail of anti-vax outspokenness.
Now, you say that Trump came up with the vaccine. I just want to, because there are people that are going to listen to that and think this guy's off his rocker.
Oh, it was in his administration, and he did a full court press, Operation Warp Speed. He got these vaccines out in a matter of, a couple of months, when most people said it would take at least a year.
Do you think that another president, and I'm not going to name the other president, and I'm not talking about Hillary Clinton, but just some other president of a relative of normal competency for that office we would have a significant delay in the issuance of the vaccines?
I do think so, because, career politicians proceed with a great degree of caution and are always thinking about, what if, and then there's people over here who are going to be upset, and people over there are going to be happy. Are they the right people to please or not? These are the kind of things that, unfortunately, all politicians think of. And Trump as sort of being the anti-politician. He's like, let's get this done. Let's do it in record time. Let's cut through the red tape. Let's cut through the bureaucracy. I'm not going to put up with it. It's a typical Trump kind of thing, just like going way back, his rebuild of Woolman skating rink in Central Park in New York. It would have taken the government 3-4 years at least, and he got it done in 6 months, because he was able to cut through all the bureaucracy and red tape. So I think he did do it faster than probably any other president, certainly faster than Joe Biden would have.
Let's go ahead.
And now I think he never imagined, Trump, that he would have to defend his, overseeing this vaccine in record time, which documented has saved many, many lives, and it may also have cost some.
Well, let's go ahead and listen.
Point.
That's a perfect segue to listen to Tucker on that.
Kennedy became the most censored famous person in the United States. At this point, most Americans have heard a lot more about Bobby Kennedy Jr. than they've heard from him. He doesn't get many offers to speak from big platforms. But last week, Joe Rogan gave him one. Here's some of what he said.
Why do 5 of my 7 kids have allergies? And of course, we know why. Because aluminum adjuvants give you allergies. They're designed to make you, to create a hyperimmune response to foreign particles. And the last category is, the allergic diseases, peanut allergies, food allergies, eczema, which I never knew anybody with eczema when I was a kid. I never, asthma, I knew people with asthma. but it wasn't 1 in every 4 black kids like it is today. So, all
That's
of
a
those
shocking
things.
stat,
Now,
right?
we went
You know
from 6%
I
of
didn't.
American having chronic disease. By 1986, we're starting to add the vaccines, and we got and 11.8% of kids now. So it's doubled.
Why do 5 of my 7 children have allergies? Now, we don't know the answer, of course, but it's an interesting question. In fact, it's an important question that deserves an adult answer, not that you should hold your breath waiting to get one. Bobby Kennedy asks a lot of questions like that. He notices things. Kennedy pays attention to the world around him, and he wonders why it's changing. He's an outdoorsman, a falconer, and a fly fisherman. He's interested in how nature works. He's curious. Not so long ago, these qualities were considered essential to the practice of science. All scientific discovery comes from observation, empiricism, patient watching. Without the willingness to put aside your pre-assumptions and assess with honesty the things you see and touch and smell, the changes taking place right in front of your face, you can't do science. You can't create art either, or journalism, or theology. You have to be willing to notice the obvious. And when they tell you you're not allowed to notice the obvious, you should be concerned. Imagine you're on a commercial airline flight. The plane is just leveled out at 37,000 feet. You're closing your eyes for a nap. And suddenly you smell smoke. And it's not your imagination. You can see it. It's starting to fill the cabin.
This
All
is
around
great.
you, people are hacking and choking. The guy in the next seat has a napkin pressed against his mouth, and he's mumbling what sounds like Psalm 23. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. So clearly the airplane is on fire. But almost unbelievably, no one has said a word about it. Not a single person is acknowledging this is happening. Everyone is silent. So in panic, you yell for the flight attendant. There's smoke in the cabin, you say, as if she hasn't noticed. But she stares at you with hard
Here we go.
eyes.
Listen to this.
Shut up, racist, she replies. That's a dangerous Russian conspiracy theory. Stop spreading misinformation or I'll call TSA and have you arrested when we land. That sounds like a fever dream, but it's also pretty close to the experience of living in the United States at the moment. All around you, things seem to be fraying and getting worse. Your gut tells you there's something very bad going on, and all the evidence suggests that there is. But
I think Tucker's doing a great job there.
Well, I can tell you, I mean, from personal experience with which Scott, having both my kids on the autism spectrum, we looked into the whole issue of vaccines, which of course by that point were too little too late because autism is a lifetime irreversible condition. Particularly the MMR vaccine, the measles, mumps, rubella, which has been sort of ground zero for the
With the thimerosal
anti-vaxxers that he was talking about,
Right.
and that's been the subject, ground zero for the anti-vax activists, shall we see, which is what RFK has been. Again, it's not just the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine. It's several before them.
And this is about vaccine health generally, not about
yes, in general,
yeah.
vaccines themselves, even more broadly than just the COVID vaccine, because of course we had different stages of COVID, 5, 6 different iterations before it essentially dissolved, and the vaccines were more successful at some points than at others. There's just too much evidence that the vaccine did damage or possibly even kill some people. I think with what we have to stipulate here is that it was an experimental vaccine. It did not go through the rigorous testing of years that most vaccines do. So I think logically you should expect that there will be some downside, that there would be some downside from the vaccine. But that in bulk, the vaccine helped to save, who knows, untold thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions.
Or not,
lives.
as Tucker says. All I'm
Not.
after is the debate. All I want to
think it's,
hear.
I don't think it's a stretch, but it's all a liability issue.
Well, and a money
as a
issue.
lawyer,
And a money
they can't-
issue.
They can't admit, look, yeah, it saved millions of lives, and it may cost some here or there, but that's the risk and reward of a vaccine that is pushed way faster than the normal process, So, but
Any
they can't
discussion
say
that's
that.
forbidden
They can't say that because
is the one that's worth
course,
having.
it's-
That's the thing I'm saying, is that any of the forbidden discussions are the one that is worth having.
Well,
Whether
it
it's
should be
vaccine
worth
safety-
having for people that hold no liability
Yeah.
or the answer. No,
And who are
you can't-
scientists who say they're interested. You're interested in science, right? And science is not a religion. It's not about this is the rule and we don't talk about the rule. Science is about looking at it and challenging it and saying, is that really the thing?
Well, science
And continuing to question and ask.
on the left, the science has become frozen at the point where it is
is
the
religion,
most favorable to the left. I mean, it's now, by the way, just to talk about that, it's now the 5 years in which the Earth, at the end of which the Earth would no longer exist, is now up.
Yeah.
And Greta Thunberg has a lot of explaining to do about why the world didn't come to an end.
This
in
is
5
something,
years.
Tim, I have
That was
been after
given
this.
serious. It was given serious coverage by elite media.
I have been after
Teenager
this
from
for decades now. And what this is every time one of these prominent people comes out and says, we've got 6 months to pass a comprehensive carbon plan or we're going to be screwed by 2027 or whatever it may be, right? That's the functional equivalent of what they're
we
saying.
have Al Gore to thank.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
all
No,
of
well, he
this.
did it too, Tim. He did it too.
Yes, exactly.
So, no, I'm saying this is not just a new thing with her. All these people, they always come up with these things. And whenever they say it, my reaction is always, hey, great. All we have to do is stop any quote unquote progress from their eyes, but in my eyes, bad laws for a few years. And then you admit, you can give up now. You already said it's too late. Why are you still on us about this? At least we can have air conditioning until we die, right? I mean, we're already over. You know what I mean? So could you just leave us be in peace?
Right. It's like, if death is inevitable, you might as well sit back and enjoy it.
Go get a pack of Pall Malls and have at it.
Yeah, really.
Sure.
I mean, if there's no tomorrow. But, this gets serious coverage. I mean,
Yes,
Greta Thunberg
Greta
gets serious coverage
Thunberg
because,
drives
it's just-
clicks. So
it's
what are you gonna
so,
do?
I mean, it's now to the point where when I see something written by the Post, Washington Post or New York Times or LA Times or those places, my default assumption is that it isn't true. Literally.
Yeah.
I'm not saying
by the
I'm
way, my
trying
default-
to. It's
Yeah, no,
just
no, I get
my
it. I get it.
mind
Yeah.
is telling me you better check if it's even
My
true.
default position is what's the story they're trying to message to people
Right.
that has
True.
nothing to
Okay.
do necessarily
Right.
with what they're
Right.
reporting, right?
What's the purpose?
right?
What's the ulterior
when they report
motive
about-
of covering this?
Like
Yeah.
with Tucker, the lead into the piece the clip I played from him, and I encourage everybody to watch the whole thing. He's really doing a great job, I think, with that Twitter show of his. Great, 9 out of 10 or better, maybe 10 out of 10. It's really, really excellent. Trump basically, even though the media hates him, they gave him a soft launch for his presidential candidacy compared to what they did with JFK Jr. Basically, in the first sentence or two
RFK
of those.
Jr.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, excuse me. What they did in this instance, though, is right away from the first line, they tell you about how he's dangerous and his views are, so that you don't even for a second, consider them as valid. Their messaging right away is this.
In
is
other
a
dangerous,
dangerous.
the headline would read "Fringe Candidate
Yeah.
Conspiracy Theorist
Right.
RFK Jr. to challenge sitting president." Right.
All right. Let's go ahead and
I'll
segue
tell you what,
into,
though, the thing is, he is, no matter what you think of his views, RFK Jr. is a serious person. He's interested in serious discussion, in serious debate. He isn't a politician.
Yeah.
I mean, he's sort of doing exactly, and there hasn't been a lot about this. It's probably worthy of an article. He's doing really a lot of exactly what his father did in 1968 when he challenged the the pro-war Lyndon
Yeah.
Baines Johnson and the whole structure of pro-war in the Democratic Party. And really, RFK Jr. is doing the same thing. He's more of a gadfly because he doesn't have the long history that his father did, but he's really serving the same function, challenging Biden the same way his father challenged LBJ.
I say this as somebody who does not like the Kennedys politically, culturally, all sorts of ways. Don't like them, haven't liked them. His discussion of what happened after his father died brought a tear to my eye for the outpouring of respect and emotion that fellow Americans gave RFK Jr. in the wake of his run-up to his assassination, which was about, like you say, anti-war, anti-poverty, anti-establishment in many ways kind of campaign.
Yes.
And I encourage people to listen to the Rogan podcast with him to hear all about it. But one of the other things that he talks about, so I've always been skeptical of his vaccine stuff. I've been interested in it as well, whether thimerosal caused autism, and read with interest anything I have seen about that. And one of the things that Kennedy talks about is cell phone radiation causing tumors behind the ear and such. And I actually know a subject matter expert on cell phone radiation, a guy with a electrical engineering degree who owns a company that basically works exclusively for one of the major cell phone carriers in this country. And I know that he testifies a lot in hearings where people want to keep cell phone towers out of their community and stuff like that. And so he has a lot of science at his command, these studies. And, what he talked about is basically that you can't prove a negative, of course. So you can't say, is something safe? All you can say is that there's no serious indication or evidence that something isn't safe. That's sort of how these things are determined, and that there is none for the cell phone radiation thing. Now, I haven't done the extra step of then going to see what Kennedy's published on this and look up EPUB publications on that. But I'm just saying it's important, I think, even in the vaccine context, to have Kennedy checked and rechecked and see what his data says. But that's what I'm interested in. I really want to hear the person from the other side who says what Kennedy says is BS, and here's why, and here's the site.
Yeah.
This whole thing of it's dangerous
debate
to discuss it, or like right away, you automatically, there's something in the law called a rebuttable presumption of liability or guilt. And to me, when you say, I'm not even going to talk about this with you, and it's a serious, there is no subject on earth I wouldn't debate if they were going to give $2 million to any charity I said, at the end of the debate.
Absolutely.
I get to give somebody else $2 million to a cause that I favor. What wouldn't I debate about? It's preposterous. That anyway, that's sort of
this is symptomatic of a society where we've come to the conclusion that there are certain truths that cannot be challenged, cannot be debated.
Yeah.
The left is not interested in discussion. They're not interested in debate anymore. They're not even interested in explaining the righteousness of their cause. They simply assert that there is one acceptable point of view, and it cannot be altered, debated, or challenged. And we see the cascading consequences, particularly in the place where open debate and challenge should be the most vibrant, which is on college campuses, where now there's an enforcement of speech codes and things that must not be said, that cannot be said, and there's settled truth. It's settled truth. Settled science is, what the left used to say about
maybe you don't like my
climate change.
Because you're a religious person, but it is religion to me. It's a commandment, Tim. It's just the same thing. It's not to be questioned.
It's a secular religion.
Absolutely. It's a secular religion. And maybe the only thing I would disagree with you with is just to give room for some liberals and call it the left, or excuse me, not call it
The
progressives or the
progressives,
establishment rather
I
than.
agree.
Yeah, yeah. That's all.
Because look, I remember
There are some great and powerful Glenn Greenwald types out
No,
there.
that's true. And you're right.
publicly that are, you know.
And you know what? I should be called on that, and we should draw a distinction because now, who would have thought Scott Wheat pined for the days where there were
Yeah.
liberals who
Right.
wanted to debate? I remember,
Yeah.
you know, growing up and starting, you know, becoming interested in politics. They had all kinds of interesting debates with liberals. They would freely discuss, debate, argue. Now,
Noam
They don't-
Chomsky went on William F. Buckley's firing line, right? So did,
yes,
I mean, it was the opposite.
Gore Vidal.
Yeah, Gore Vidal
Yes,
famously.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was the entire culture of you know, platforming. The idea that it's somehow wrong to discuss an idea shows the weakness of the idea.
Well, it's also incredibly dangerous. Look at what they did during the pandemic. They decided there was only one point of view.
Well, that's
the
where it all
vaccine,
comes
it was
back to.
very,
Yeah.
very narrow, right? So that anything that was outside of that narrow window was censored, and that's when you get. That's where you really cross the line to where you're not really a free society anymore.
All right, let's talk for a little bit about Mr. Trump. And he had an interesting week as well. It was a week ago from the day they announced the Hunter Biden. Well, they didn't announce it, as we already said. We discovered the Hunter Biden news that they had performed the arraignment on Mr. Trump. He had an interview with Brett Baer on Fox News. Did you see the interview, Tim?
I did.
Was it, to your mind, a disaster?
Not at all.
Okay, all right.
Except in one respect.
Okay, so I think it was, and I want to talk about why, and I want to hear why you think it wasn't, and what was the one area where you thought it was a disaster?
Well, the one area I'll start with the negative is, and this doesn't even have to do with whether what he claims is true or not. That's not the issue. When he repeats again, he was asked what he would do to try to win over those fickle suburban soccer mob, so to speak, that basically helped get him elected in 2016, and then were probably primarily responsible for kicking him out in 2020. What message would he have to them? He went back into repeating that in 2020 he did not lose, and he went through all of the statistics from Arizona and whatever. Okay. And, you know, it's not even a matter of whether that's true or not. It's a matter of, in this
Messaging.
country, with anybody, within any country, that people are looking ahead. What are you going to do for me in 2024, 25, 26, 27, 28? What are you going to do for me? What is your agenda going forward? And what are you going to promise? Because when he promised stuff in 2016, he essentially delivered or attempted to deliver on all of it. Okay, so that to me, I discussed that with a couple people, in the general consensus, you know, people in the know, was that he just has written off those people, doesn't believe that those women who think his personality is so icky are ever going to really vote for him. So he's not going to pander to them. So, but that aside, I thought he projected strength and confidence. I think he projected that his experience, in other words, he's now speaking from a point of knowledge. He's been in that Oval Office. He was in it for 4 years. He saw all the players on the stage. He's dealt with foreign governments all over the world. He kept us in peace, which is something that he pointed out, that he was the first president in this century not to get us into a new foreign conflict. He pointed out, rightfully, that when Bush was president, Putin went into Crimea. When Obama was president, he went into Georgia. I might have flipped those around. And when Biden's president, of course, we have an all-out ground war in Ukraine. And that the only stretch of time in there where Putin did not take over a region or a country, or attempt to, was during the Trump years. And I think that projection of strength and success in his previous iteration, which was as president of the United States, I thought that came off as strong, every bit as, let's put it this way, when the issue with Joe Biden is his weakness, his enfeebled condition, which you can see more with each passing day, Trump offers exactly the opposite of that, which is proven strength. Many people think too much strength, but he also, here's the thing, Scott, to me, he didn't look any older than he did 4 years ago. I mean, he has not aged. He's sort of the opposite of Biden, who has just, seemed like he's fallen off a cliff for whatever reason in terms of his cognitive skills and his energy and his appearance and his countenance. Trump is the opposite of that. He's everything that Biden is not. And the question again comes down to, are voters going to want someone they perceive as too strong or someone they perceive as too weak?
Okay. I appreciate all that. That wasn't what I'm referring to, but I wanted you, and I didn't interrupt you because I wanted your political analysis, and I have it, and I appreciate it. I think that the interview was a disaster from Trump's penal interest or his legal interest regarding his federal criminal charges. And so that definitely is an interesting juxtaposition of how a person can run for president and also be subject to criminal charges, because the one thing that probably every attorney agrees on all around the country, without exception, is shut up if you're charged with a crime. Don't talk about it. Don't talk about the facts about it. Because, I think all the lawyers I saw, like, talking about Trump's interview, thought it was a disaster, and I joined them, and I'll just explain why.
They go after Trump. They're going to get him if they're going to get him.
Let me explain.
Does it
let me explain
really
why.
matter what he says on an interview?
Yeah. Well, let me explain why, for other people, at least, Tim, that if they find themselves charged, why it's important that they don't talk about these things. There's a rule about out-of-court statements and how they can be introduced in trial. And basically, the rules of evidence say that if you make an out-of-court statement, it can't be introduced at trial, generally. But there are exceptions. And one of the exceptions is if it's against your interests, it's an admission, a statement against your interest, then prosecutors can introduce that statement against you. And if you want to then rebut that statement, you're going to have to testify. And the reason why it's, almost every criminal, you don't want your client to testify. And the reason why you don't want your client to testify is because under cross-examination, it's easy to produce a set of answers that tends to make a person guilty. That is what prosecutors are expert at doing,
right,
regardless of whether they are guilty or not. It's their job to kind of create that sort of painting a brush with the facts that creates that guilty look. Okay, now we're hoping. And I say that with a pinch of salt, for sure, that, they only use that power for good to put the people who actually, we have really good evidence, and for crimes that are important crimes, to put them behind bars. But that's why everybody's like, he needs to shut up. And so Trump, let's just go ahead and play a quick.
So let me just ask you this. I mean, in normal circumstances, I would think most people would know not to start blabbering in public. And it's true. It never helps you to take your business outside of the courtroom. But that's when you have a real legal prosecution as opposed to a political prosecution. In a political prosecution, the point is to get the guy no matter what. Yeah, and in the case of Donald Trump, he'll say some outrageous things, but he always does that. And he's the most well-known person in the country, probably in the world. I can't believe that anything he says really is going to have much of an impact on the self-fulfilling prophecy that the left hopes these political indictments are.
Donald Trump faces the very real possibility of spending the rest of his life in federal prison, Tim.
I understand, but I don't
and
think anything he says on that interview is going to change that.
let's play a clip and we'll see if I can't change your mind.
Okay? I'm open.
But I do want to just,
You can
end with
imagine
this. I don't want to dwell on it, but according to the indictment, you were here at Bedminster on July 21st, 2021, after you're no longer president, and you were recorded saying that you had a document detailing a plan of attack on another country that was prepared by the U.S. military for you when you were president, the Iran attack plan. You remember that?
Ready?
You were
It
recorded.
wasn't a document.
Okay.
I had lots of paper. I had copies of newspaper articles. I had copies of magazines.
I know.
I
This
had
is
copies of
specifically a
everything.
quote. You're quoted
And
on the
no,
recording saying the document was secret, adding that you could have declassified it while you were president, but quote, now I can't. You know, this is still secret, highly confidential. And the indictment cites the recording and the testimony from people in the room saying you showed it to people there that day. So you say on this, on
It
tape,
says just the opposite.
that you can't
and let me
declassify it,
just
so
tell you,
why have it? is
When
what
I
the question is.
said that I couldn't declassify it now, that's because I wasn't president. I never made any bones about that. When I'm not president, I can't declassify.
And that's
But
what you said. You didn't
said that.
declassify it.
I said no. I said I couldn't.
could
But
have
that wasn't a
declassified it.
document, Brett. There was no document. That was a massive amount of papers and everything else talking about Iran and other things. And it may have been held up or may not, but that was not a document. I didn't have a document per se. There was nothing to declassify. These were newspaper stories, magazine stories, and articles.
I'm just saying what the indictment says.
Well,
the recording
these people-
and the
look,
people in the room who
these
testified.
people are very dishonest people. They're thugs. They're thugs. If you look at what they've done to other people, what they've done to and overturned in the U.S. Supreme Court, these are thugs.
The
These are
suggestion
dishonest
was that
people.
you wanted this as evidence that the military, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Milley, had preemptively sent you plans for a possible attack on Iran and that you didn't order that to happen. That's the
I
suggestion.
never ordered it to happen. No,
But that's
no.
why you wanted the document.
I don't think I've ever seen a document from Milley. Milley, frankly, was incompetent.
Okay, that's the kind of thing that I think is
Right.
going to get him in trouble. Like, I've never seen a document from Milley. Well, okay, so now you may, and I may think, we've talked before on this program about, I think we both, we just think that the style of communication of Donald Trump is as a bullshitter, for lack of a better term, and not in a way necessarily that he expects people to rely on substantive remarks, but it's the frequent use of hyperbole. And I've never received a document from Milley. Well, that's preposterous, right? But when you go to court, then it's like, oh, and here's a sheaf of documents that you held it, here's a picture of you with them in your hand, of the general handing them to you. So we know that you've gotten documents from General Milley. And, you don't want to have to be on the stand defending those kinds of statements, because the prosecutor will make it look like that lying is just a part of what you do. And again, this is about explaining to people what not to do when they're charged, Tim, with a
Right.
crime. More people
Sure.
get hung up, even from the corner dime bag dope deal, straight up through to Martha Stewart. So many defendants and would-be defendants get hung up on their own statements. It's the most important thing to do when potentially confronting criminal culpability is to stop speaking.
Right. Well, but that's impossible for Donald Trump.
Yes.
I think he's proven that he's actually, at this point, not just unwilling, but virtually incapable of keeping his mouth shut on something he wants to discuss. I mean, he's never let, it seems, a thought go unexpressed.
Right.
And that is just his MO. That's what makes him so different from any other politician we've ever seen. You said something that probably shocked some people who hadn't really been paying all that close attention to it. You said he could spend the rest of his life in prison. Simple
Yeah.
question. What's your over-under for the type of punishment he is likely to receive, assuming that some of these 37 charges stick?
I am so glad you asked that question, Tim. because I have arranged for the appearance on this program of a practitioner in the federal courts who day in and day out is a federal criminal trial lawyer. And we're going to go right to the horse's mouth and get some great information from them. That's on a future episode airing in July of this very program. And with that preview, I think we will let you go to your weekend privileges. And thank you for appearing here, and direct the people to your fine work on the pages of LibertyNation.com. You had a good examination of the mail-in ballot issue
Yes.
that confronts Republicans and aided or not Donald Trump's election, and what might happen in the future in that regard. And I encourage everybody to visit LibertyNation.com and read that, and we will see you next week, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, make sure to read it because there will be a quiz.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Scott.
Bye.
We are the uprising. Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at LibertyNation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are LibertyNation.com.
That's it for this edition of The Uprising. Remember to hit Liberty Nation News for original articles, LN Radio, and our signature television program, The Conservative 5. Just go to LibertyNation.com on your browser or hit Rumble, YouTube, or check out our Liberty Nation News Roku channel. I'm Scott Cosenza. Thanks for joining The Uprising. This program is a production of LibertyNation.com, where truth is making a comeback.